I'm talking to Colin Broderick. He is the author of Orangutan, his memoir on the first 20 years of his, no, maybe the first 30 years of his life. Colin, I'm going to read what is written in the back of the book about you. Colin Broderick is a writer-carpenter from Northern Ireland. He lives in Manhattan with his wife Renata and their daughter Erica, and I understand that Erica is there watching a movie right now.
She's here watching Finding Emo in the background.
Thanks a lot for taking time. I had met you in Los Angeles a couple of months ago, and that was a few months after Orangutan came out. Now, just tell our viewers who published Orangutan how long it took you to write it.
I started writing Orangutan in June of 2006, and in about June of 2007 I found an agent, Jane Distel in New York here.
A terrific agency.
Great agency. She represented Barack Obama on Dreams of My Father.
Yeah.
She liked the book, we hit it off, and she decided to publish it. And then I spent another 2 years working on it. So I spent about 3 years in total writing it.
And you started off as a carpenter, I believe that you came to New York when you were what, about 19 or 20 years old?
I moved to New York when I was 20 years old.
Okay. And at that time you were a carpenter but always wanted to be a writer, correct?
That's correct. I'd always had this feeling that writing was my true calling, and I'd always written, even since I was a kid, so I'd never really done anything with it seriously until I came to New York. And even then, I didn't really take it seriously. I drank more than I wrote at that time. It wasn't until I was maybe 23 years old I started really taking it seriously.
And when you started writing Orangutan, and I won't tell people why you titled it that, but boy, that image bleeds throughout the prose. You were fairly troubled young man who had lived a good part of his young years really dodging bullets. Is that an over-exaggeration?
Not really. I'm still a fairly troubled young man. I'm not so young anymore.
Not so young anymore, yeah. You got a few years, Colin.
I get into less trouble these days. But yes, it was a very reckless, I think sort of a suicidal lifestyle that I lived for many, many years. As I was writing Orangutan, which is basically a document of the recklessness of my life of 20 years, my editor kept asking me to maybe throw in some of my childhood and maybe mention some of the whys, or why does somebody do this to themselves, and I didn't put any of that in. I just decided to focus on my life from I got off the plane in New York at 20 years of age in 1988, and just stick to what actually happened in that 20 years.
Now we should tell viewers that you have you've got another book in the pipeline, don't you? And it's also a memoir.
I sure do.
That's wonderful. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Random House bought the follow-up book to Orangutan, and that is called That's That, and that is the story of my childhood growing up in Northern Ireland. And I guess the second book will put the first in perspective. I think it's almost like I started at the very end, and I'm going all the way back to the beginning. I'm going backwards, reviewing my own life, I feel like.
What occurred to me, and we've talked about this a little bit, and so I'd like to spend some time here. What occurred to me as I was reading Orangutan was how similar it was in terms of content or topic to A Million Little Pieces. That during the time that I'm guessing this, during the time that you were writing your memoir, did kind of the shit hit the fan with Frey's book? And if so, what was that like? So here you are in a room writing, and then this happens. Maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
The shit had actually hit the fan with Million Little Pieces before I started with Orangutan.
Oh, it did? Okay.
And it was, it's funny, there's all this, you get such a hard time about writing that book, about what's not true and what's true, and it's such a touchy subject with memoirists, because really it's a great book. It really is. It's a great book, and there's a great energy to it, and I feel like people sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater with that book, and what I took from his book was the energy and the rawness with which he wrote was very appealing, and yes, he fudged some of the facts. I guess all writers do to some degree, whether they believe they do or not. The truth is sort of a very subjective topic to get into, but what I decided to do because of that was make sure there was nothing about Orangutan that would ever come up that people would say, that's not true. I can be held accountable. And because of that, going into the vetting process with Random House, because of what happened with James Frey, they went through a whole vetting process with their lawyers.
I was going to ask you that.
To make absolutely sure that anything they had any questions about could be verified, if not by factual evidence, by people who could back it up, if actually say, well, this did happen, and they go through that whole process, and they're very strict about it now.
When we had talked before, I had mentioned the NPR interview that I heard where Norman Mailer was just, he really came to Frey's defense and said that, essentially he said, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said all writers who write memoirs have to be liars. To an extent.
Yes.
That old expression about never let truth get in the way of telling a good story. I think that there's some of that in writing one's memoir. I mean, surely none of us can remember verbatim what happened. What we take from it is the feeling that resonates, and then we put scenes around it. I mean, is that pretty much the process? Because surely during the time when you were drinking so much, there's no way that you could have remembered dialogue, etc., but you were left with the feeling of it, and that's what you put on the page.
Yes. And when I didn't remember, if you read the book, when I didn't remember, I say, I blacked out.
Yeah.
And I write what I do remember. But I did an interview with Colin McCann, great author and great friend of mine, and we talked a little bit about this also in the interview, and but the whole element of storytelling. But all great writing is basically storytelling, and my whole take on it was, with the James Frey thing, people tell stories and they must be interesting. As I said to Colin, tell me a boring story you heard when you were 10.
Well, I have to tell you, I'm looking at the clock now, and I promised that I wouldn't keep you that long. I'd love to do this again for the next book. I wanted to just share just a little bit about memoir writing with our viewers, and you have done that. Tell me the name of the second book again so that we can look for it.
The name of the second book is That's That.
That's That. And
That's That will be in stores September 2011.
Wonderful.
And I have a website, www.colinbroderick.com. I'm also on Facebook at Orangutan the Book and Colin Broderick. So if anybody's interested in keeping up with current information, please feel free to contact me.
Well, we are definitely interested, and I hope that this is one of several interviews, Colin. Thanks so much for taking the time and